this is an interesting experience for me because this is moderating a panel remotely, virtually. So this is the first time for me. And we also have one of the panelists that is joining virtually as well, which is Peter Levi. We do have Raghav from HSBC, Neha from Climate Bonds, and Dr. Mukesh, advisor from JSPL, along with us in this panel. This is an interesting panel. We have industry perspective, we have finance perspective, and we have a policy perspective, all three pillars which we touched upon in the presentation. If I may begin with Peter, IEA produces a lot of reports, and it's perhaps one of the most frequently and most repeatedly cited document in the conversation of steel decarbonization. I know you engage a lot in IEA engages a lot in India as well, Peter. If you can please begin by sharing the exact nature of role and engagement that IEA has in India, in particular for steel. I know you work on energy transition and a lot of other things, but for steel, how does IEA view India and how does it engage in India?
Yeah, absolutely, Shiv. Thank you very much, and just thank you to the organisers, thank you to the Climate Group, thank you to Responsible Steel, for inviting the IEA to speak, and thank you in advance to my fellow panelists also. I'll just say a few words about one important report that the IEA released that's particularly relevant to the Indian policymaking context at the moment, and this is a report. I'm sorry, I've got a bit of feedback. Are you hearing me okay in the room?
Yes, we can hear you well, Peter. There's no feedback on our side.
Okay, great. Sorry.
Maybe
no
Shiv, while you're not speaking, if you could mute yourself, maybe that could help.
So I'll just provide a few words on this overview of this recent report called Life, or Lifestyle for Environment, which is a report about India's initiative to involve people in the environmental movement. And one of its key pillars, obviously, is energy transitions, and it focuses on individual behaviour and personal consumption choices. And in our work at the IEA, our ongoing modelling work on the steel sector, but also across all other sectors of the energy system, we've started estimating the role of measures that are associated with these behavioural changes and personal consumption choices. This could be electric mobility, the purchasing of different efficiency levels in appliances, public transport usage, recycling, particularly relevant to the steel sector, etc. And our analysis suggests that we did for this report and in our ongoing annual modelling exercises that around a fifth of the emissions reductions required by 2030 to get us on track for a global net zero emissions by 2050 trajectory, around a fifth of those emissions by 2030 are achieved via these behavioural changes and personal consumption choices. And the good news around these is that lots of countries have policies that are already aligned with the spirit of India's Lifestyle for Environment initiative. And an important factor to keep in mind is that these types of changes are not designed to reduce the prosperity or levels of well-being in populations. They're meant to be as a complement and as measures to really obtain the same service, but deliver that service more efficiently. So the executive director of the IEA presented these findings of this recent report to Prime Minister Modi back earlier this year, and the Prime Minister welcomed the work and requested the IEA to contribute further to India's G20 presidency. And we're now in the process of performing additional analysis and forming it into and feeding it into that process. We can't say at the moment exactly what the precise outcome of our engagement in the G20 will be this year, but our recent presentation at the G20 Development Working Group went very well, and we hope more countries in the group are able to encourage desirable outcomes as per the circumstances and conditions of each country. in the context of these discussions. So stay tuned, I guess, is the short answer to Shiv's question about our upcoming involvement in India's G20 presidency. But as you're aware, our engagement with India is long-standing, particularly since the tenure of our executive director, Dr. Birol, since the start of his tenure as executive director. India has been one of the key focus countries for our engagement beyond the core membership of the IEA. India's been a key focused country for our analysis on steel, with a special chapter devoted to it in our steel roadmap quite a while ago now, 2018, but in several other publications like the World Energy Outlook since. So we continue to engage directly with India, perform analysis, and provide insights wherever we can.
Thank you, Pete. I think it's time we probably look forward to seeing you in India sometime, during one of the G20 meetings, probably. Speaking of steel, I want to turn my attention to Dr. Mukesh, who's advisor for JSPL. And interestingly, from our perspective, JSPL has indeed applied for ResponsibleSteel membership, and that's in active process right now. I want to ask Dr. Mukesh if you can please share with the audience here what were the strategic drivers that drove JSPL to seek for the membership, and more importantly, I also wanted to ask him how important are the social principles for JSPL. I know JSPL is doing a lot of work in terms of containing the emission intensity, but Dr. Mukesh, how important are the social principles for JSPL?
Hello. Yeah. Good afternoon, Shiva, and thank you very much. Like JSPL, you have told, we have already submitted the application, and we are in the process of completing other formalities like submission of the fees and other things. And we are very hopeful that by 15th of May, we will be able to complete most of the requirement of the responsible steel applications there. And we want to become this thing, a member at the earliest. Why we want to become the member of the responsible steel? Because you have shown in your slides, it is not only carbon emission, but it is other parameters also, like environmental parameters are there, social parameters are there, governance issues are there. I think we are the company, if you see in the past, and right now our position is that we have our special foundation that is called Jindal Foundation. And we are running a parallel this thing, taking into account all the social issues there in the nearby areas, empowering communities, ensuring their health is taken care, their drinking water issues, nutritional issues, other things are there. So those things we are not directly involved as a Jindal Steel, but we have created a separate foundation for that. And across our group chain, we are undertaking these type of these things. We have set up the first OP Jindal University also as a part of our social commitment. And then in the nearby areas also, we are supporting a lot of the health issue programs, then educational programs, then disabled programs and other things. Even in Delhi also, we have created a special center that is called National Trust of Handicap. And there we are running a special program on that. So as far as the social issues are concerned, that is on our priority list. And as far as the other things are concerned, we are pioneer in number of things. I think we are the only company in the world who has taken risks to go with coal gasification based iron and steel making. Because our focus is that we should maximize utilization of our domestic resources and minimize dependence on imported raw materials and resources. That is our this thing. With that concept only, we started going ahead with decarbonization. I think we are the only company in the country who is capturing around more than 2,000 tons of carbon dioxide. And now we are working on the second part of that, how we want to go ahead further. So our environmental compliance, our social compliance is far beyond than our commitments. So only taking into account that when we are going for export also, we are exporting lot of steel also. And nowadays, some buyers have also started asking certificate from responsible steel and other things. So that is also one of the requirement is there from the business perspective point of view also. And I think getting responsible steel membership, we get a lot of input also. How we should, where are the opportunities which we may be missing, and we can take care of those opportunities to improve our performance. Because like you have mentioned CCUS also, because in Indian conditions we know that there are a lot of constraints, and that's why these things are there. So I think that is the basic reason behind going for responsible steel membership. Thank you. I will take some question later on. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Doctor. Thank you. It's great to know that the work that you're doing, that your company is doing on the social aspects, starting with the universities and the handicapped, the disabled support system and things like that. This is really great to know. We do have to discuss more on the company's international footprint, but still decarbonization needs a lot of finance. We have two eminent panelists here representing the finance. I want to begin with Raghav from HSBC. HSBC, we engage, Raghav, we engage with HSBC in Europe quite heavily, and they are also part of our finance working group that I manage along with the other colleagues. I want to begin by asking you, like, in India, in HSBC, do you have a specific mandate or a requirement in terms of the commitment for sustainability or net zero production, in particular for steel and also in general? But does HSBC governance in India require that certain aspects of your business, certain part of your balance sheet should be dedicated towards sustainable activities? And within that, does steel have a separate sort of a quota within that?
So I think thank you so much, Shiva, for having me here. That's a very pertinent question. But I think, a more pertinent question before I kind of get into that is that we obviously have a large sustainability commitment, which is kind of trickling down from our global commitments to obviously in-country commitments as well. But there's a large problem statement that we are trying to solve here, and that problem statement is there is a large funding gap, that we are trying to kind of mobilize, with our own balance sheet, with the help of multilateral institutions and as a group of banks in India. Overall, we've made an estimation that if you just see the India RE targets, right, which is 450 gigawatts by 2030, there is approximately a funding requirement of about $170 billion per annum between 2020 to maybe 2030. There is a paper that's been presented to the PMO and to the Ministry of Finance. I also had the privilege of chairing the e-mobility committee in CFLI and also through CFLI, where we've done a credit assessment of what is the total green credit that's available. So we've taken an average over the last 3 years, and these are all from public sources. And quite surprisingly, the total green credit that's been available over the last 3 years, that's from financial year 2018 to maybe financial year 2021, the average credit to this entire sector for decarbonizing from an RE perspective on a standalone basis is just a mere $20 billion, right? So if you see the gap, it is not just off the cuff. It is a very serious gap to be plugged. There is a journey that needs to be initiated to plug a gap of almost $150 billion per annum. So our efforts in India and also globally have been on 3 pillars. One is how do we shape and influence global and local policy agendas, which are sharply skewed towards developing catalytic financing models. And that's not only to the large anchor corporates. The large anchor corporates pretty much, and we actually have privilege of banking quite a few of them. But then it's also to ensure that the vulnerable part of the ecosystem, which includes SMEs, MSMEs, startups, and so on. Within the green steel sector, there are some green steel startups, etc. How do we make credit available to all parts of the ecosystem, right? And when I say how do we make credit available, it's how do we ensure that we are giving wings to the project that each of them are kind of involved in. So so one is obviously a very sharp focus on the overall policy agenda. The other is our own balance sheet commitment. So globally, we have committed, and this is, I think, pretty much in public domain, a sum of $1 trillion to be invested through financing and investing activities until 2030. We've globally deployed about $200 billion in various projects. These are not equity investments; these are pure debt investments. In India, we run approximately a $27 billion balance sheet onshore. I mean, there are two terms which are very famous these days, which is mainland India plus the GIFT City. So in mainland India, we roughly have a balance sheet of about $27 billion. Out of GIFT, we have a balance sheet of about $4 billion. These are numbers outstanding as of 31st March 23. 16% of this balance sheet is green. Now, this is not only in terms of just green loans, and obviously if you add the green bond number, that's incrementally to the extent of about $10.1 billion over the last 3 years. I mean, the last 1.5 years have been pretty much bad for the international bond markets, but overall the number of bonds that have been issued are close to maybe that number. So if you really see, Shiv, I mean, there is a large commitment that we do have, and there's obviously an appetite to do more. The third pillar is obviously through our corporate sustainability development activities, where we've allocated a grant funding and probably there's some other piece of funding that's kind of come together to the tune of roughly about $80 million. This is purely focused on trying to solve for other SDG problems. So we do believe that through our corporate sustainability activities and through the financing activities that we have, HSBC does end up addressing 13 out of the 17 UN SDGs. Now, having said that, and with this basic problem statement of how do we kind of solve for financing, it's also, I think, it's also kind of worthy to note that finance is not a driver. Finance is only an enabler. So if you have a green project, right, and if that project, at least from our perspective, if that project commercially, stacks up, we will go ahead and fund that project. All what I can say is, since there was a question whether there is a specific allocation to steel or not, so any project for us that drives decarbonization. So for us, the way we've identified, so you obviously got these RE projects. If you take projects on road decarbonization and steel decarbonization, that in total kind of accounts to about 26% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So for us, these two and the other sectors, so if there's a solar project, if there's a green steel project, if there's a green hydrogen project that is going to end up supporting green steel manufacturing, that will get priority. And when I say priority, it's out of the allocated pool of projects which may offer lower returns but have a higher risk initially. Plus, at the same time, they come with a margin benefit of roughly between 50 basis points to about 80 basis points in case if the project is sustainable. So sustainable projects definitely, have that margin benefit as well. I'm just going to take a pause there and maybe build on further.
We will come back. We will come back and chat a little bit more on the margin benefits that you're talking about. But I just missed out. You mentioned something about mainland India, and what's the other?
That's the GIFT City. GIFT City. GIFT.
Sorry?
So the other one is GIFT
City.
City out of Gandhinagar, which is obviously kind of coming up quite well. The total capitalization in GIFT City today is about $30 billion. And this has just been in the last 3 years by all banks put together that are operating out of the GIFT City.
And I want to make sure I heard you right. You said $80 billion for
No.
in the
It's
form of
it's $30 billion in GIFT City, which is the total credit that all banks have there. In India, the total credit that flows by the financial services industry is approximately $1.4 trillion.
You mentioned a figure for grant funding as well.
So I'll give you an
Grant
example.
funding.
Yeah, so that's again, how do we kind of address some vulnerable parts of the ecosystem? So there are two parts to it, right? So you got a corporate sustainability linked initiatives where we've developed, there are like multiple funds. One is on water, one is on land, one is on education, one is on COs for sustainability, and so on and so forth. All of them put together is approximately $80 million. The other part of grant funding is that we do partner actively with NGOs to maybe support and come out with our accelerator programs to support some of these startups across these decarbonization technologies that end up supporting these wider anchor units.
Thank you. Thank you, Raghav. You touched upon something very interesting on the bond, and you mentioned that the bond market is not doing well in the recent past, and that's a good.
That's
question
the
to
international
go
one,
back
but
to.
I think investors have started also, tapping the domestic bond markets. But obviously, everybody knows that the domestic bond markets don't have that level of depth. Yeah, but I guess that's another area of focus for the government. I think where they've been taking some very serious steps of late.
Yeah, I'd like to lead up to that conversation with Neha, who's from Climate Bonds. It's probably more appropriate to talk about that. But Neha, before you get into the details of the bond market and how it's performing, just for the benefit of our audience here today in this room, what's the kind of role and scope for climate bonds in India? There's been a lot of green bonds issued in India. I'd like to know if climate bonds was involved with any of these transactions, and if so, in what capacity, and what's the size of the engagement that you had in India?
Yeah, thank you, Shiv, for this question. When you say that how we were involved, first let me just give a broad overview of the green issuances so that one gets a perspective of who are the companies and where are they tapping the finance from. And first of all, Climate Bonds Initiative, it's a global not-for-profit, okay? And when you say how is it involved in those transactions, we do not structure any transaction. We are the ones who have been at the forefront of setting standards for debt instruments. So if you would say green bond, then what is green is a taxonomy-based standard that Climate Bonds comes out with. It is a global standard, and it follows the Paris goals, so to speak. So in your standard, for example, there was E and S and G. We have been very, very focused on mitigation primarily, and also adaptation and resilience, but that hasn't yet come out as a taxonomy by itself. But what we are doing, and I think what will be relevant today to discuss, is also the transition agenda, because that is sort of moving within the, I don't like the word brown, I think it is really not appropriate, but within the industry where you don't have green assets per se, which are not pure play green, but which are hard to abate, where certain technologies are in place. So there is a movement from less green to more green, so that we'll talk about, which is right now termed as transition, but for us, all of it comes under the umbrella of green transition, right? So we play a standard setting role, and we also certify. And these are the debt instruments that we certify right now. We are getting into an entity level certification also, where you will have equity investments, etc. But we have not yet come to that certification of equity instruments. In India, 25 billion USD worth of green bonds have been issued. And actually, let me rephrase. 25 billion USD worth of GSS debt, which includes green, social, sustainability linked, sustainable, yeah? So the sustainable finance landscape is full of these thematic instruments. Green still dominates because it has a slightly longer history than all other, and it is the most simple instrument for people to look into. How we have been involved, I will give you a statistical figure. Nearly half the volume of issuances in India have been certified by us. What does that mean? It means that the issuers who are borrowing and the investors who are giving that capital are looking at credible issuances. So if you just say that I am a green bond and you self-label it, it really doesn't cut it with the investors. And who are these investors? They are primarily international green capital pools that the Indian large companies in the renewable energy space, transport sector, water infrastructure have tapped. So here there is a small little sliver which is emerging, which is of these new instruments which are of two types. I don't want to get into the jargon, but it is important to understand. And HSBC is sitting here, and JSPL is sitting here. We have had at least half a dozen of issuances from the steel sector, infrastructure sector, which are called sustainability linked, right? And what does that mean? It definitely means that there are no direct assets, but there is a sort of a KPI linked instrument, and all of those instruments have tapped international investor pool because that's where the largest demand is coming from. So yeah.
So, Neha, sorry to interrupt you. I think the SLBs needs a separate discussion. So we will come back to this question, and I'd like you to a little bit elaborate on that. I'm also a little bit conscious of the time, and we want to capture as much as viewpoints from all our panelists. You talked about taxonomy, which is very relevant for bond, which is also super critical for steel subject, steel in the context of steel decarbonization as well. There's been a lot of discussion, even in the morning session, about how do you define green steel. And we at Responsible Steel, we always do not use the term green steel. We consciously use the term low embodied carbon steel in all our standards and all our discussions. And we also believe that the debate about what is green steel, it takes a lot of energy. But IEA does a lot of work in measurement and accounting, and sort of enabling this discussion around the taxonomy. The latest report that IEA produced to G7, Peter, was dedicated towards the accounting and measurement frameworks. What do you see is the relevance of this in India, particularly in the context of this sort of attention towards defining what it is and trying to get deeper in the taxonomy of steel decarbonization? How do you see these things relevant, and what role can IEA play to clarify this taxonomy aspect in India?
Yes. So the short answer is huge. What is the significance? It is huge. It is huge simply because that the borrowers and the lenders have to understand.
Yeah,
this is the question for IEA.
Sorry to interrupt you. Okay. Sorry to.
Not a problem.
That was a question to Peter.
Okay.
No problem. Sorry, I will keep my answer short so the other panelists can give their views as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, very briefly, how did the IEA become involved in this area of steel decarbonisation, and particularly the implementation challenge? We were invited by the German G7 presidency in 2022 to look at two key components of the implementation challenge. On the one hand, the policy toolbox, and on the other hand, the common definitions for what constitutes near zero emission steel and cement production. And those elements of our report that we produced for the Energy, Environment and Climate Ministerial back in May last year were warmly welcomed by the G7 members in their communique, and Japan's G7 presidency has subsequently asked us to take forward the topic and focus specifically on the measurement standard element of the common definitions component of what we were working for with Germany. The communique from the Japanese G7 presidency has just been released, and we were delighted to see strong references to our work in there again. And it's important to note with respect to what does this mean for India, that the G7, the communique, the group, the work that we've been doing there, that we've been requested by our members to do there, have been acknowledged as a robust starting point. This is a kind of direct quote from the communique language. It is just that. So the G7 and these reports that we've been producing are just that. They're a robust starting point. But of course, we need to go further, both in the analytical scope and also in terms of the stakeholders that are involved, different countries and also non-governmental actors, to broaden the consensus that we have achieved among the G7 members. So that was the answer to the second part of Shiv's question. And just briefly on the measurement standards work, this work has been released just last week or the week before. I'm losing track of time now, but the work that we did for Japan's G7 presidency, which was on measurement and data collection, these two topics for steel specifically, rather than steel and cement last year. And really what we identified in that report, you can read it in detail, it's available for free on our website. But there were really two components to this report. The first was a review of the existing measurement standards that are out there. So what are the methodologies that are currently being used to address this challenge of measuring on a like-for-like basis emissions from one site relative to another site? What are the technical approaches there? We looked at responsible steel standard as one of the key standards to take forward and develop in an iterative review process, along with ISO standards and also world steel methodologies. And so that was one part of the review, the report, and the review itself, and then the kind of consolidation around working with existing standards. And then the second part of the report was really looking at can we develop some principles and recommendations for the G7 initially, but for other bodies involved in the standard setting process. The IEA is not a standard setting body, although we work on this topic as a kind of in our analytical capacity and in our convening capacity. We are not writing measurement protocols or standards for the industry. This is the job of others, including Responsible Steel, but also ISO and other organizations. But we developed principles to guide this process, and I'll just touch on the 5 key points before I hand over to the other panelists. We thought that the first principle has to be this like-for-like comparison. This is the challenge in India, is the challenge globally. If you cannot talk about the same measurement on the same basis, if we're not all measuring in kilograms or meters or whatever it is, if we're not speaking in the same language measurement-wise, then we can't possibly hope to have robust measurements and policies based on those measurements going forward. So that's a very important principle for these standards. That's not true of all measurement standards today, and that's not the intention of some measurement standards today, to measure on a like-for-like basis between all steel sites. Second principle is that they need the standards need to produce interoperable results between standards for production, crude steel production, like the slides Shiv showed from the Responsible Steel Standard, and then also for products. So there was a question on that from the audience. The results for those two different things need to be interoperable. The emissions boundary, this is the third principle, needs to be appropriate for a net zero world. So it needs to include core process emissions from the process, but it also needs to include upstream emissions. Some of those were already mentioned by Shiv and other panelists. The fourth is around accounting rules. So we need to have fit for purpose accounting rules that don't give credits for fossil utilization of fossil derived products, whether those are emissions flows or energy products. And they should be compatible, these accounting rules, with a net zero energy system. And then the final principle is around incentivizing the use of specific measured data at the site level, rather than just default factors that are provided by the IPCC and others, including ourselves, in fact. Rather than using these default kind of national average figures, we should be incentivizing producers to really measure these data at the site level and at the product level, so that the data that informs the policies, the financing instruments that have been talked about are really asset and product specific to ensure robustness and transparency. Sorry, I'll leave it there, Shiv. I'm aware we're short of time.
Thanks, Peter. That's absolutely a very critical point in terms of having real data rather than default values that is being used. And that's what we try and capture through our audit, and try to increase and find an answer to this data challenge that globally we are facing, and certainly in India as well. I'm just a little bit want to turn the focus on the technical aspects of production of steel and what exactly is happening on the technology side in terms of decarbonizing steel. I know JSPL is in a massive expansion spree in their Angul plant. They're trying to expand from 6 to 25 million tons per annum, and they're setting up a new entity in Odisha, which is about almost 19.5 million tons. This is a new plant that's being set up. I'm very curious to know from Dr. Mukesh what specific steps are being taken technically in production of steel to sort of produce sustainable steel or low embodied carbon steel as part of these expansion plans. Are you using carbon capture, or using storage? You mentioned about coal gasification and things like that, but Could you please elaborate in all of these massive expansion plans, what steps are being specifically taken to produce low carbon steel?
See, because decarbonization is one of the main agenda of our expansions. Like we say that we, 3R principle is there, reduce, recycle, reuse. So this 3R principle has been converted into 3C principle. 3C is carbon minimization, carbon avoidance, and carbon recycling. So that is the principle what we are trying to adopt in all of these things. In India, we are taking this thing, but outside India, we are going to be, I think, the first steel producer who will be putting up a 2.5 million ton hydrogen-based steel plant in Oman. There we are setting up our own renewable energy, wind energy, hydrogen productions, and everything we are doing. So we have already declared this thing. But as a part of our carbon recycling is our one of the major focus area. We feel that if we can recycle entire carbon through carbon monoxide and green syngas instead of green hydrogen, then we can reduce our carbon emission by more than 60 to 70%. So that's why our major focus is on developing 3 technology. One is carbon capturing, because present technologies are very expensive. We are developing alternate technologies where the cost can be reduced of carbon capturing by more than around 60 to 70%. So instead of going with our organic based, we are going inorganic based. Second thing, we are going with carbon recycling. Our major focus is converting carbon into carbon monoxide and reusing it so that fresh requirement of fossil fuel is avoided. Third is going with electrolysis route, capturing carbon dioxide, taking waste heat of the plants and doing electrolysis, producing syngas without any coal. And that syngas is again used in the steel making, iron and steel making. And besides that, we are looking into bioethanol productions because we know that bioethanol is a good source and it can consume a lot of carbon dioxide and some gases from our plant itself which are rich in carbon monoxide and hydrogen. So with these 3 principles in mind and then coal gasification along with CCU, that will be one of our main DNA because we have started this thing, we want to continue with this thing. So in future, we will start injecting more and more hydrogen because hydrogen we know lot of technical issues are there which need to be addressed and those may take time. Since our expansion plan is very fast, we want to go by 2030 from 6 million ton to 25 million ton. Maybe presently we have to look for existing technologies only, but with these initiatives, we definitely feel that more than 60% carbon reduction we will definitely achieve in our new projects.
That's excellent. I'll stay with you, Dr. Mukesh. You talked about Oman because I know JSPL has a truly global footprint. You have operations in mining operations in Australia and Mozambique. From a mining perspective, also because mining, there are a lot of changes happening in mining in terms of increasing the metallic content of the iron ore. The mining companies are now slowly thinking and in fact doing production of DRI themselves. What changes are being undertaken in your mines and changes in product mix that could support the sustainable production of steel?
Recently, we have acquired the world's largest coking coal mines, where we are producing around 50 million ton of coking coal annually from our Mozambique operations. We have in Australia also. But as far as you are talking about from the mining perspective, we know, because if we increase even 1% of the iron, it helps us to reduce CO2 emission by 2 to 3%. So our major focus is on developing new processes and adopting new processes and minimize use of low-grade iron ore. So our major focus is that we should go above 64% in blast furnace and above 67% in DRI making. And like in Oman, we are using 67-68% grade. Our carbon footprint is only 1.05 there because we are using natural gas also. But whatever carbon footprint is there also we are going with carbon capturing and recycling. So we feel that we will achieve in DRI also around 0.4 to 0.5 ton per ton of crude steel in even DRI also with these carbon. So this iron ore beneficiation is one of the main target. Similarly, we are doing iron ore slurry pipeline. We are putting up around 12 to 15 million ton slurry pipeline. We want to completely avoid rail transportation, road transportation and other things so that those scope 2 emissions also can be taken care. So we are not only attacking scope 1, but scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, all 3 we are doing. Then we are doing some innovative approach also. we want to see that some of the steps in iron and steel making can be avoided. Ji. Because today major emission is coming from pelletization, sintering. We want that in iron and steel making, if we can avoid these two steps and can use iron ore directly inside the blast furnace, so that itself can reduce my CO2 emission by 25 to 30%. So we have identified, yes, maybe next 2 to 2.5 years, we will turn out all these technical options. And I think we will be one of the best company from the carbon footprint point of view. And with these three principles, carbon minimization, carbon avoidance, and carbon recycling, this is the 3C principle we feel we will be able to meet world expectation also, which they are expecting from us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That sounds very, very interesting. Just a quick question, a very brief answer. You talked about 64% iron ore. Is it after beneficiation, or is it coming out of your own mine, or you're getting it from outside of India?
Most of the iron ore mines in India, grade is decreasing. It is going to 54, 55. So some of the technologies are there, like which are not used in India at all, like dense media separations, where we use ferrosilicon to concentrate iron ore. And even if we are having 50, 52% iron ore, that can easily be converted into 65 plus grade iron ore. So with that itself, my resource efficiency will come, my productivity will improve, my CO2 footprint will decrease, and overall cost of production of steel also will decrease by around 10 to 15%. So those type of things are there. We have to take some disruptive type of steps, not like a routine type of things. Because hydrogen technology is very far away, molten oxide electrolysis is very far away, and even oxide decomposed electrolysis, ODE technology which we call, is also very far away. So either you wait up to 2040, 2035, and then continue to become a import-based country. Otherwise, try to use the best whatever is available in the existing technological framework and see that you can meet your world expectation also and can meet your domestic requirement of the steel also. Because our requirement will continue to grow by more than around 7 to 8% CAGR.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. Atul, I'm a little bit cautious of the time. We are approaching close to the end of this scheduled time, but we started about 15 minutes late our session. I'm hoping that we can extend by a few minutes, 10, 15 minutes to cover for that late start.
Yeah, sure. I think 10 minutes should be good. I think we've got a session starting at 3:30, so yeah, if you could close that.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. I want to turn towards Raghav. And see, Raghav, from your perspective, you did mention about margin benefits for carbon intensity of steel based on the intensity of steel that is produced. But how do, from your perspective, from the bank's perspective, how do you, could you sort of lay out for us how a successful business case would look like, what it would contain? If a steel producer comes with you with a business case, can you give a very top line? I know it's a very lengthy discussion, but at least if you want to highlight 2 or 3 critical things that would help the steel producer to convince a bank, what would that business case look like, and what would you specifically like to see in the cash flow?
I think the way I'll just want to take it, and my apologies, this has to be the last one. I have a hard stop now, so I'll have to leave after this. I hope you're okay with that. So I think broadly, I think the way I'll address this is certain incremental parameters that we would kind of look at specific to the steel, specific to the steel industry. So one is the usual credit assessment that a bank would do, but incrementally, there are certain aspects that we would probably kind of, have a look at. One is purely the demand creation, given that steel is largely used in infra-stroke housing. Obviously, the next 3 to 4 years look great, but then, what after that? These are long-term gestated projects. I don't think a steel manufacturer is going to come to a bank looking for funding for 3 to 4 years. It has to be a much more longer tenor funding. So clearly, the demand creation aspect of it, the demand pipeline, specific to infra, housing, and if there are any other segments as well, that's going to be critical for us. The second is that how competitive would certain companies have would probably build their plans with. So, for example, you got large Indian steel manufacturers in India. Tomorrow, there is a large international player who wants to kind of come in, say Arcelor, Arcelor wants to kind of come in and say that I'm setting up a steel plant in India. What's the preparedness of Indian domestic manufacturers, to kind of combat that, right? So a Fed, and that's obviously a function of technology, that's a function of demand pipeline, that's a function of, dependency on, as in like third party or maybe external dependency or the input, stroke the raw materials, right? So, as in like most of the steel manufacturers, and please correct me if I, for my understanding, but I do believe that most of them have got fairly captive sources, where I think there is self-dependence of almost 60 to 70%, in terms of the input raw materials. We would typically kind of look for that comfort between 55 to 70% is probably the range in terms of, having self-dependence. If we do not have that level of self-dependence, that is going to be a red mark in our credit evaluation. And then, when we finance decarbonization projects, it's not really a binary function of start stop, right? That you are at a X percentage of carbon emissions today, you immediately shift to a Y, to point Y or point Z. I think it has to be a gradual. So I think it has to be a gradual journey of. So I think it has to be a gradual journey of this whole piece around the decarbonization. Uh,
In audio.
Yeah. So, and the other third key parameter is that, like decarbonization is a journey. It's not a start stop from point X to point Y to point Z. So for us, any project that evidences the journey towards reducing your carbon footprint, be it in terms of scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, I think that should classify the product, the overall project as sustainability. One key risk that every borrower today kind of runs is, and that's coming back to the point on the taxonomy that Peter and Neha also made, that we don't have a taxonomy today, and there's an imperative need to have shared vocabulary, shared definitions across.
Yeah.
We are pretty much close to RBI on this, and I know that that's in very advanced stages. RBI has already done 2 rounds of climate stress testing under various scenarios. Hopefully, we should have a taxonomy sooner than later. And I think once that is in place, I think it's just going to help the broader ecosystem to kind of have a unified, this whole project presentation in terms of borrowing. So I think those would be the top 3 or 4 incremental aspects that we would kind of look at specific to the steel industry. And this is obviously over and above, the standard credit assessment process. Just one last point that I would want to make here is that if the project is sustainable, we would not really be, tied up with the fact that it should make us a minimum, it should kind of fetch us a minimum, obviously we cannot be overriding the risk, but we can certainly be lowering our return threshold. So we have an allocated pool of $10 billion globally, which has specifically been carved out to support higher risk and lower return projects, provided everything else kind of stacks up. I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Raghav. Thank you for joining us. That's great to listen from a banker that you can support high risk projects with low returns. Neha, you were discussing about sustainable linked bonds and transition finance, and I promised you that we'll return back to that question to you separately. Can you please elaborate a little bit more on both of these sustainable linked bonds and transition finance, and are there any specific actions that climate bonds is doing in India using these two, and if there's any use cases that you would like to share for steel, because this morning we had someone talking about viability gap funding and how important that is, and I think these two are possibly a solution for that. Could you please share your views on this?
Yes, thank you, Shiv. So first of all, just one comment on what has become very apparent in this discussion and some of our discussions with other players in the industry is that in the case of India, there are technology constraints and there are also commercial viability constraints. So when we talk about rapid decarbonization, I think these will keep on bringing us up in face to face with many, many challenges. For example, what I also gathered here was each company or different companies are trying to do something about the low-grade iron ore that is a constraint, or the blast furnace technology. I think these are the two main things. As scrap, I will keep aside. And what I understood was that even the shifting from blast furnace to electric furnace or optimization of blast furnace itself is not going to be done in a hurry. And why I'm mentioning this is it is important because the time within which we want to see the decarbonization happen and the kind of standards that are coming into place focus on some of these technologies. So for example, and I will quickly come to the SLB part of it, but Climate Bond's criteria for steel, and it will be, I will also share a presentation that probably Climate Group can circulate to the participants with links to the criteria. You would see a lot of emphasis on we have the activities and assets which are in scope are about optimization of electric arc, which is automatically eligible because it is electric, or optimization of blast furnace technology, which was installed prior to 2007 and to after 2007. And here is where I also want to bring in the focus on how the criteria are set in terms of quantities, in terms of very, very specific baseline numbers and the trajectory of net zero, right? Now, so SLBs in that sense what has been happening in SLB market is there's about in the region of $250 billion globally, and if you take India, that will be in the region of at least 2.5 to 3 billion already within a span of 2 or 3 years. But in 2022, we saw a dip, and the dip was not only because of the high interest rates, but it was also because of a harsher scrutiny that SLBs have come to face. And why is that? It is because the ambition with which the target is set is generally ambiguous or not up to the mark. So that has been so for that to be controlled, the criteria of the credibility of SLBs is now out. Hopefully that will be in the market and there will be entities which will be looking at that. I will just conclude by saying one thing over here, because I don't think we have enough time, that these instruments will have to be backed up by credible transition plans. I think we are entering into an era of plans, transition plans, and not simply an asset that you will have. And that will have to match certain hallmarks, which is targets being backed by action plans, internal governance processes, strategies, as well as external reporting. But I cannot get into that detail. We will circulate those links. But here is what where I'll stop.
Thank you, Neha. It's a deep subject. We probably your presentation that you'll be sharing will be very, very useful. I'm afraid we have nearly reached the end of time. I want to take some questions from the audience if they have for the next few minutes. But before I go into that, one last question, Pete, if you can answer in maybe less than 10, 15 seconds. You have a vantage point of looking at policies across the world. What specific policies would you like to see, policy changes or interventions that you would like to see in India that can support steel? We discuss a lot of policy initiatives in my presentation and later on in the discussion as well. But from a global perspective, from what you've seen, would you like to share your thoughts on any specific policy interventions that you think would help accelerate this journey in India? Peter.
Yes. So I will probably look at the.
Ne- uh, Neha, my apologies. Maybe I'm not being clear, but I was asking this question to
No.
Peter. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Why don't you go?
But just a few seconds. He's not going to take a long time, I'm sure.
No worries. I'm going to very slightly dodge the question because I think that we're not prescriptive in this policy toolbox that I mentioned as to exactly which policies each government should adopt. What I can say though is that you can think of, particularly with respect to the deployment of these near zero emission technologies that have been mentioned several times, iron ore electrolysis, carbon capture, hydrogen-based direct reduction. There are three kind of key considerations or groups of policies and things that need to be taken into account in the policymaking process. The first is push mechanisms. So really these are things about deploying demonstration projects, funding the initial few plants, pull mechanisms, which is to do with drawing those plants' production onto the market through differentiated markets, through other systems for achieving this, bridging this cost premium. And then the third bucket is around the level playing field and making sure that via international collaboration and other dialogues between countries, we ensure that steel, given it's a highly traded product, is being traded, produced, measured, policies implemented around it, all in a kind of level playing field environment. Those would be three key considerations, and I'm sure I did more than 15 seconds, but back to you, Shiv.
Thank you, Peter. Dr. Mukesh, I can see you probably wanted to add something on this. Would you like to share something very, very quickly? And you'll have the last word before we wrap up.
No, because what you told, some policy intervention are definitely required, and Government of India has taken a lot of these things. Like they have come out with a G1 policy for bioethanol production through carbon dioxide utilization. Earlier it was not there, but now they have included carbon dioxide as a raw material source for bioethanol production. Similarly, viability gap funding for various projects that is coming out. Viability gap funding, because most of the technologies are in nascent stage, return may not be good. So this type of viability gap funding may be required. Some accelerated depreciation rules may be required. Some national hydrogen missions policies are coming. So under that also, these are things are required. So Government of India, Finance Ministry, Ministry of Steel, MNRE, all are taking action. And I think once the job of 13 committees under Ministry of Steel which have been formed, they will come out with the special policy recommendation which can push towards decarbonization and having low carbon emission steel in the country, and which can be acceptable globally also without violating WTO rules.
Thank you, Dr. Mukesh. Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you, Dr. Mukesh. Thank you, Neha, for this very, very, very insightful conversation that we had. You know, this conversation came up with a lot of insights that would giving us more food for thought and more food for thinking.